Let me start with something we all take for granted: the interstate. It's basically this giant bloodstream of roads that runs through the entire country. You can get from one end of the U.S. to the other on it, and millions of people use it every day. And for most of us, it represents freedom. Road trips, the open road, music in the car, that feeling like you can just go. But in the 1980s, for a specific group of women, the interstate meant something else entirely. It meant danger, because along stretches of highways in places like Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas, women started turning up dead. And what made it even more disturbing was the pattern. Many of them had red hair, and whoever was doing this didn't just kill. He left bodies in ways that felt deliberate, possessive, almost like a signature. For years, these victims were treated like ghosts, unidentified, unclaimed, filed away as Jane Does. And the person hunting them seemed to disappear back into the road every time. Tonight, I want to walk you through what happened, why investigators struggled for so long, and how technology, decades later, finally started giving these women their names back. Now, this is the story people came to call the Redhead murders. One of the moments that really shattered the idea of the safe open road happened on September the 16th, 1984. It was along Interstate 40 near West Memphis and Arkansas. A driver pulled over and noticed something in the tall grass off the side of the road. Now, it was the body of a young woman. She had been strangled, and our most noticeable feature, what multiple reports would keep mentioning, was her hair, strawberry blonde, fanned around her head. For investigators, there was this sickening sense of something that's just familiar. But because this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and they couldn't fully know yet, but this woman, who would later be identified as 28-year-old Lisa Nichols, was part of a puzzle that was growing more terrifying by the month. Because soon another victim would be found near the interstate, and then another, and another, and slowly the map began to fill in. Then the year 1985 began with a discovery that really locked fear into place across multiple states. On New Year's Day, down a steep, wooded hill off Interstate 75 near Jellicoe, Tennessee, someone found another body. A young woman. She was bound, wrapped in a blanket, and discarded like she was nothing. The autopsy showed she had been strangled, and it likely happened days earlier. Her hair was curly and red. And here's what made it even more heartbreaking. They didn't know who she was. To the world, she was Jane Doe. To investigators, she became known as the Campbell County Jane Doe. And in 1985, identifying someone in a case like this was just brutally difficult. So they took fingerprints, and there was no match. They charted dental records, but without a name, there was nothing to compare them to. Sketches were drawn and distributed, but those sketches were often all anyone had to work with. And the saddest part is, even without a name, investigators learned personal things about her. She'd given birth. She was pregnant, about 10 to 12 weeks. She had a partial upper denture. So she wasn't nobody. She was a person with a life and a story, and probably someone who loved her. But to the system, she was just a ghost. And as more cases appeared, a pattern started to form. The victims were often women whose lives moved closer to the highways, sometimes hitchhiking, sometimes sex work, sometimes just drifting. That lifestyle detail matters because it meant two things. First, it made them vulnerable. And second, when they disappeared, they weren't always reported missing immediately. And that gave the killer time, a built-in head start. And the way these women were killed was often consistent too. Strangulation, that's not distant, it's not quick, it's intimate and brutal. It requires control, it requires contact. And then there was the bodies where they were left, near major interstates, 75, 40, 24, and 81. Places where you could dump someone and be miles away before anyone even noticed. And that's when this idea started to take hold. This wasn't one county's problem. This wasn't even one state's problem. This felt like someone using the interstate as a hunting ground. And as the mid-1980s continued, the horror expanded. Authorities still debate the total number, But the cluster that scared everyone the most happened between 1983 and 1985. Not long after the Campbell County Jane Doe, another nightmare surfaced. On April the 1st of 1985, two men searching for some spare parts in Knox County, Kentucky, found something that still feels unreal. A discarded refrigerator sitting beside Route 25, and inside it was a body, a young woman. She was nude except for two pairs of socks, and she had two distinctive necklaces, one with a heart pendant and one with a gold-colored eagle. Now, the autopsy suggested she had been suffocated, and yes, her hair was red. She would remain unidentified for 33 years. And what happened next is one of those details that stays with you. When no one came forward to claim her, the community held a funeral anyway. Hundreds of people attended. Just imagine that. A room filled with strangers mourning someone whose name they didn't even know. Then, only 2 weeks later, April the 14th, 1985, another body was found along Interstate 81 in Greene County, Tennessee. This time, it was a teenage girl. She'd been pregnant and had miscarried shortly before death. Now, she had been killed by severe blunt force trauma. Her hair was described as light brown or blonde with red highlights. Now, even that small detail was enough for investigators to wonder, is this connected? Is it one person? Or are we seeing patterns where we want to see patterns? And that's the nightmare part, because the bodies weren't being found in one neat cluster. They were being found in Tennessee, Kentucky, Arkansas, Mississippi, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, but always near highways, always near interstates, like the road itself was part of the crime. Now, we have to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough when people look back on serial cases. In the 1980s, law enforcement was working with a completely different system. There wasn't the kind of instant information sharing we have now, no modern national databases the way we think of them. Communication was just slower, more local, more fragmented. If a body was found in one county, it was that county's cases. If another body showed up across the state line, that was someone else's cases. And sometimes those departments just might not even know the other case existed. That fragmentation was a massive advantage for the killer. He could move through the cracks, and the interstate system gave him the perfect tool for that. Pick someone up in one state, kill them, dump them in another, and be hundreds of miles away before even anyone knew what happened. And if the victim wasn't reported missing right away, that advantage doubled. In 1985, April, officials from 5 states met with the FBI to compare what they had: Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Kentucky. They laid out the files, compared evidence, and debated connections. And then they saw some similarities: red or reddish hair, highways, certain patterns in disposal. But there were also differences. Some of the victims were close, some weren't. Some showed signs of sexual assault, some didn't. Cause of deaths varied: strangulation, suffocation, blunt force trauma. And those differences created uncertainty. At the time, officials couldn't officially declare this is definitely one man. And you can imagine how frustrating that is, because when you can't connect cases, you can't pool resources. You can't share suspects efficiently, and you can't build a single investigation. And again, the killer benefits. So investigators did what they often did in that era when evidence wasn't enough. They turned to profiling. The FBI behavioral science units was asked to build a portrait of the person behind the crimes. Not a face, but a mind. And the profile they created pointed to something that made a lot of sense: a long haul truck driver. Because, think about it. Who has a legitimate reason to be traveling across multiple states? Who would naturally be moving along major interstates? Who would have privacy and control in a mobile space? A truck driver fits that. And truck stops would give him access to vulnerable people passing through, people alone, people who might accept a ride. The profile also suggested something else: that the choice of red-headed women wasn't random, that it was a preference, a compulsion, maybe tied to someone in his past. And that act of strangulation suggested power and control, because that's what strangulation is at its core. It's domination. And the posing of bodies when it occurred suggested a final act of possession. It was a message, a signature, but the problem was obvious. Thousands of men fit that general description. So even with a profile, finding the right person was like searching for a needle in a continent sized haystack. Then in 1985, there was a moment that could have changed everything because someone survived. Her name was Linda, and her story is one of the most terrifying windows we have into the killer or someone very much like him operated. Linda was a young dancer with red hair working at a club in Knox County, Tennessee. A trucker named Jerry Leon Jones was a customer. He propositioned her. Now, when she refused, his demeanor changed. He tore a $100 bill in half, gave her one piece, and promised the other half if she complied. Now, when she still refused, he attacked her, overpowered her, forced her into his car. And then he did something that echoes through so many of the other cases. He tore cloth from her own t shirt and used it to bind and strangle her. He choked her until she was unconscious. Believing that she was dead, he just dumped her body in a storm drain under Interstate 40 and left. But Linda wasn't dead. She regained consciousness, freed herself, and got help. And her testimony gave investigators something they'd been desperate for. It was a name, a face, a first-hand account of the method, a red-haired victim, ligature strangulation, dump site near an interstate. Jerry Leon Jones fits the profile. Then he was arrested. And in 1987, he was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and assault and sentenced to prison. And for law enforcement, now it felt like a huge win because they had a man in custody who looked like the Bible Belt Strangler. But here's the problem. Back then, they couldn't prove he was connected to the murders because no DNA, no definitive forensic links, or so he was in prison. But the larger case remained unsolved, and the question lingered: was he the killer, or just one predator among many? For years, the red-headed murders case went cold. Files just gathered dust. Jane Doe's stayed nameless. And then something happened decades later that sounds almost unbelievable. A high school sociology class got involved. In 2018, in Elizabethton, Tennessee, a teacher named Alex Campbell was looking for a project that would make sociology real for his students. He stumbled on the Redhead murders and asked the class a simple question. Was this the work of one man? The project became a podcast called Murder 101, and the students started digging old reports, patterns, timelines, missing person listings. And while doing so, they focused heavily on the Campbell County Jane Doe, the woman that was found on New Year's Day in 1985. They came across a missing persons blog, a 21-year-old woman from Indiana named Tina Marie McKinney Farmer. She was reported missing around Thanksgiving 1984, last seen with a trucker heading towards Kentucky. The timeline matched, the details matched, and suddenly something that had been stuck for decades started moving. Meanwhile, investigators at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had access to technology the original investigators could only dream of. They had resubmitted evidence from the case for modern testing. And then they found semen on items connected to the Campbell County Jane Doe. When that DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the national DNA database, it hit Jerry Leon Jones, the same man already in prison for the attack on Linda. And then, with the identity lead pushed forward by the students' research, investigators confirmed the Jane Doe's identity. On September the 6th, 2018, they announced it. Campbell County Jane Doe was Tina Marie McKinney Farmer. After 33 years, she had her name back, and it's hard to explain what that means unless you really sit with it, because a Jane Doe isn't just unknown. It's a person whose life got erased in the system, a person who couldn't be mourned properly because people didn't even know who they were mourning. So giving Tina her name back was huge. And the DNA link to John's? Well, that was the smoking gun investigators had been missing for decades. In 2019, evidence was presented to a grand jury. They concluded that if Jerry Leon Jones had still been alive, he would have been indicted for Tina Farmer's murder. But John's had died in prison in 2015, so there would be no trial, no confession, no full accounting of what he did. And that made the breakthrough bittersweet because now we have another question. If Johns killed Tina Farmer, what about the rest? Lisa Nichols in Arkansas, the woman in the refrigerator in Kentucky, the other Jane Does. Were they his victims too, or was something even darker true? That multiple predators was using the same highways at the same time. The TBI was careful. They said, we can link Johns to Tina Farmer, but we don't have enough evidence connecting him to every case. So the Redhead murder stories became more complicated, not one clean narrative, but a tangled web. And then came another revolution in forensic science, forensic genetic genealogy, the thing that has been giving names back to the nameless in case after case. Groups like the DNA Doe Project began working with law enforcement to identify victims using genealogy databases. DNA from remains gets turned into a profile. That profile gets compared to distant relatives in public databases like GED Match. And then volunteers start building family trees backward until they find a name. It's complex work, but it's miraculous. And it led to a series of identifications connected to these cases. In November of 2018, the Greene County Jane Doe pregnant teen found off of I-81 was identified as Elizabeth Lamont, 17 years old, missing from New Hampshire since 1984. The woman found in the refrigerator in Kentucky was identified as Ipsy Regina Black Pilgrim. Her daughter, who was just a baby when she disappeared, recognized the jewelry from an online post, and DNA confirmed it. Later identifications followed. Michelle Inman, identified in 2023. Tracy Walker, identified in 2022, only 15 when she went missing in Indiana in 1978. And every identification is more than a headline. It's a person returning, a family finally getting an answer after decades of uncertainty. But it also reopens the case every time because once you have a name, you can trace last known movements, connections, people who were around them, and potential suspects. So where does this leave us now? We know that Jerry Leon Johns killed Tina Farmer. We know he attempted to kill Linda, but the larger picture is still incomplete, and it leaves a haunting question. Was Johns a prolific serial killer who covered his tracks well enough to avoid being linked to other murders, or was he one of several predators hunting the same highways during the same era? Because that second possibility is chilling, that the interstates weren't hiding one monster, but multiple. And that's why this case hits so hard, because it's not just about a killer. It's about vulnerability. It's about how the road can be both freedom and danger. It's about how easily people can disappear when society isn't paying attention to them. And it's about persistence. A survivor who lived, a high school class that cared enough to dig, investigators who didn't let the Jane Does stay Jane Does forever, and a scientific revolution that's now giving victims their names back piece by piece. So I want to ask you what you think. Do you believe Jerry Leon Jones was the Bible Belt strangler responsible for most of these murders? Or do you think this case is actually multiple killers, multiple predators whose crimes got woven into the story because of similarities? Let me know in the comments, because this is one of those cases that still feels a little bit unfinished. And if you want more deep dives into the cases like this, where history, mystery, and modern science collide, make sure that you subscribe and tell a friend. We've got some more great stories like this coming up. This is The Dark Room, and I'll see you on the next one.